In a second-hand set of dimensions, on an astral plane that was never meant to fly, through wavering star mists, see the Grey Satuin. Drifting onwards through space, atop the shell of the world's turtle, are 4 giant elephants, upon whose broad shoulders rests the Discworld. Welcome to Dining Table Discworld. We're reading through the Discworld novels and discussing them at our dining table. Be aware there will be spoilers for the current book and others in the series.
Hello, welcome to Dining Table Discord. I'm Dave.
I'm Kathy.
And today we are bringing you part 2 of our Fifth Element discussion because it was getting long, the first episode, so we thought we'd do 2 of them.
There was a lot to say.
Yes, I think
still is.
Yeah, I think we may well be having a few of these, either longer episodes, or we'll see about whether there need to be 2 parts. We have notes.
If you are coming in first to this one, it's worth going and listening to the first half of the episode on the Fifth Elephant, where we will actually do the synopsis and a lot of the character stuff, and then we have various other things now. It probably makes more sense.
Do not listen. This is not a situation where you can jump in on part 2.
Well, you might be able to, but you're going to miss a fair bit of stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so
early on in the first part, we talked about sort of, I guess, dwarf cultural stuff generally, but now we are going to talk about dwarf gen stuff, which is obviously largely about Cheery. So Cheery Littlebottom was introduced in Feet of Clay and quickly became, as far as one can tell, the first openly female-presenting dwarf in Ankh-Morpork, and also invented forensic science, so that was quite a week for her.
I mean, she's as blazing a path for dwarven women, and also blazing a path in science as well.
In fact, there's a bit in this where Vimes at one point says to Cheery, "Why haven't I made you sergeant yet?" And Cheery's like, "I don't really like dealing with confrontation." So she's like the head of SOCO, but, that's a Scene of Crime officer, which I think I must have picked that up from TV. Also, I don't think it's an American one as well. No. But yes, she's perhaps not so much with the kind of yelling at people, which is more the sergeanting thing.
No, I think she really should have her own rank, really, some sort of, specialist.
Possibly. Is it a bit like how Councillor Troy has got a really high title that means she can't be in charge of ship even though her job is mental health?
Depends on what point in Star Trek we're talking.
I don't know, it's just like...
She's in the chain of command.
Which is a confusing situation.
And which means she can be given hot control command on the bridge. However, she's not actually...
She's not trained in any of the bridge jobs.
Until later on in the series.
Which is why that doesn't make any sense as a hierarchy. So these people on the side.
Yeah,
that's what we're saying for Cheery. She should be on the side. Anyway. So yes, and we saw that Cheery had quite a mixed reception to what were fairly, I guess if you're looking at the range of female clothing, sort of conservative, modest changes to her appearance. I think Vine was a little confused about it at first, mostly because Cheery kept having more and more makeup when he saw her. But Vine's being human is used to some people being female, and at that point he was even used to some people are female and also watchmen.
Yes. Both those things are now an option.
But it's more that female and dwarf were the 2 things that didn't go together. But by this point in the series, Vimes, he shows a very positive attitude to Cheery and also to detritus.
I mean, yeah, he is basically standing there going, these are people of Ankh-Morpork. They will go wherever we want them to go, and they will behave exactly how they want. And if that means that Cheery wishes to bring a very glittery battle axe to the reception, then she can bring a very glittery battle axe to the reception.
I mean, it's...
I'm also bringing the troll.
Well, yeah, it's telling that Cheery as a female dwarf is about as weird as a troll, the natural or long-term enemies of dwarves. So that's the kind of, I guess, culture that she's up against. But as we saw in Feet of Clay, there's a range of reactions. But there does seem to be an idea that things are shifting a bit in Ankh-Morpork. One thing I'll see is Sybil's point of view on dwarf women, which is good. Obviously, I said in the first part how happy I was that Sybil is back, and she's talking to Cheery about dresses before the soiree in the dwarf mine. And she has her own thoughts on fashion, but she doesn't put that on Cheery. So Cheery's got 2 dresses she's decided between. It sounds like a red and a blue. But Sybil's just being affirming. She sort of says which one she'd prefer, but Sybil's one of those people who's quite sensible and also has a lot of presumably incredibly well-made and high-quality dresses, but they've been passed down over a long period of time. But yeah, she's just helping her with her choices, Doesn't say girl talk, but like a little bit of that. Because the main other, I suppose, interaction we've seen is with Cheery and Angua, and part of that was when Angua sort of encouraged Cheery to kind of come out. So.
Yes. I suppose they're more on a watch level.
The idea of dwarf femininity very much seems to come from human women. Like, that's sort of how Cheery initially kind of describes it to Angua a bit. That's like her idea of what being female or femme or a woman is. And then also with trolls, because with trolls it's clear they're a male and female, but again, they're always presented as very masculine. Any of the ones you encounter are all masculine.
As I say, we beyond Ruby
I think
so
Ruby's...
far, I can't remember any significant...
There's, I think, a mix of genders in the trolls that talk to Rincewind back in Light Fantastic, but obviously that's quite early. And they're kind of wild mountain trolls. Well, I mean, did Trish just mention his grandmother briefly in this?
Yeah.
But it's interesting because even in moving pictures, her femininity seems very much, she's kind of taking ideas and about figure and dress, and I mean, dress at all being, I think, a bit of a thing for trolls, but that seems to be coming from the human women she's associating with.
If you think about a lot of the other races, that they don't have that. There's only really dwarfs don't have. Well, up until now, don't have female figures. The trolls don't. Can't think.
The trolls probably do, but we just don't know what it looks like.
Yeah, but the idea of the only other option they've got is the human version. Is that as we see other races introduced, even Igors, it's primarily blokes.
Well, would you see
the Kelder?
We see the Kelder.
But you're not. That's a different type of femininity. I think.
And she's sort of hidden away within because they're quite like ants or bees or something. I think.
The goblins, Well,
we've not got to those yet.
We haven't got to those yet, but the golems,
I think the main other one, the main other thing we saw, which we did comment on in Soul Music episode, is Susan's dwarvish classmate Gloria, and how we discussed probably in retrospect something very progressive is happening there, which may be why Gloria was being sent to a human girls' school.
Yeah, let's get her out of the way.
There was Princess Jade, who was also a girl and Susan's classmate. So
I mean, I don't suppose you see much. You don't get an idea of her physicality, though. You don't.
No, you don't.
Like Ruby is described as wearing, the classic film, the feather boa and all of that. But outside of the school uniform, there's not really a description of.
Yes, and I think also a lot of the trolls we see tend to be. It's that kind of like big, slightly thick guy.
Yes,
like persona they're all there for, and that. I mean, you can write women for that, but that doesn't seem to be what's come to mind. Anyway, so it's interesting, I guess, with that. And then we sort of see Sybil's viewpoint on dwarf fashion. She'd just wear, like, something quite modest. But she says, in some respects, the new dwarf...
With pockets. I feel like Sybil is someone who would definitely have pockets in
I'm pretty sure her flame retardant apron has a very large pocket in the front.
Yeah, and I think all of her dresses would have pockets specially made in them.
True,
anyway.
And probably a fair bit tweed. But the new dwarf women, she gets the feeling that they're not going to overturn millennia of tradition for no twin set and pearls.
That's fair.
But when she's talking to Cheery, Cheery's, bless her, Cheery's accessorised, and Sybil, and this is one of the quotes I always remember really well from it, she's like, well, if I was wearing a large axe on my back to a diplomatic function, I expect I'd want it to be sparkly as well. And you sort of get the impression that Cheery has like a dress. I mean, I drew this as a teenager. I drew a picture of Cheery, and I think I had some like gel pens or some sparkly red pens, so I did like an axe, had like rubies in the handle and stuff. To go with a red dress, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, part of me is wondering, is it
with a full beard?
Is it a lot of kind of glitter and sequiny things, or is it just very well polished, very chromed, and with some very nice, gemstones?
I think it'll be gems because it's still dwarfish, isn't it? But then later, when it's the actual coronation rather than the kind of soiree beforehand, Cheery's wearing a traditional dwarvish outfit, and it's already been made clear that she has like a simple leather skirt and she has like slight heels on her, like very heavy boots, but it still looks quite dwarven, perhaps compared to the dress for the soiree. But she's wearing a full dwarven outfit and no skirt for the coronation. And Vimes is like, well, no, you wear what you want. You and Cheery's like, no, I want to wear this. I'm still a dwarf, because that is a very dwarf thing. So of course you're going to dress traditionally, and I think that's fine too.
It's dwarf traditional dress.
And the thing with Cheery is that when the character's first introduced, and with these, we see more of her and how she is kind of back home in the very much more traditional conservative sort of place, is she could be kind of about feminism. The whole point is about, oh, there are women too, are being recognised. It could be an analogy for gay rights. which I think was more of a thing being discussed at the time the book was written. But what is very much come to mean for a lot of people is or a character that implies a lot of stuff about trans rights, which was less in the public conversation at the time. But Rhianna Pratchett has said, when protecting her father's reputation, that, they knew trans people as a family, that, so this wasn't a group of people he was unaware of. Because the villain of the piece in this, and so we are going to go into, I guess, the how it was done with the crime. So in the first part, we did discuss a bit about the Scone of Stone, which I already explained why that's hard to pronounce for me, being stolen, and Vimes being called in to investigate, and Shiri being brought in because she's his senior crime officer. And there's various things where she's looking at, like, they're in this chamber, and there's all these counterweights, and there's, like, a boat you take up, and there's guards, and she was like, oh, it looks really well secured. And Vimes is like, well, nowhere has guards more attentive than a place that's just had a robbery. But also the fact that the dwarves are in it are quite covered up. They're the kind of deep down dwarves that tend to have the kind of hooded hat.
It could be anyone under there.
It could be. Although there are obviously only certain people that are supposed to access it. Vimes also at one point manages to surprise the guards by going back over. There's one of those walkways that can tell weight, and if the weight is different, it can tell. Vimes gets through that because he's taller than a dwarf. But the point is, they would have noticed someone taller than a dwarf being in the mine. And then Chiri's looking at it and going, oh, yeah, there's all this sand here. Could the bags of sand be taken? And that wasn't what Vimes was thinking. But when Chiri said, it's like, well, now I know how a dwarf would solve this. What it turns out actually happens. The person who did it was Dee, who's the king's ideas taster, seems to be the translation into human, Morporkian English.
Grand Vizier, in other words.
Yeah. And Dee seemed to be like a little bit annoyed by Vimes, a little bit, like putting up with them, but seemed fairly calm and stuff on the surface, and a bit like, not necessarily liking when Vimes was pushing into things, but like, who does like that when Vimes is pushing into things?
When Vimes starts sticking his nose into things, it's not...
But the king had told Dee, that's what Dee did. Yeah, so what Dee did was conspire with the werewolves, who...
Those friendly bunch that, nice guys,
Yeah, well, we discussed at the end of the last part.
Yeah.
To not just steal, but destroy the Scone. And then they had the replica made and stuff like this. And this is Vimes is kind of where that was what's happening. The replica was made in Ankh-Morpork, presumably to expose it as a fake and stop Rhysson from being crowned Low King. And then when they realise it's Dee, and it's sort of clear that's coming a bit, and Sybil herself actually compares Dee, in analogy to like the bad guy in the Big Dwarf opera that she sang part of. But it's that what Dee did, thinking it was the real Scone, was basically carve it up. Like, literally, I don't like, grate it. Yeah. Like, so the sand that's in there isn't sand, it's the remains of the Scone. And I knew that's what happened, because as I said, I've always remembered this book. It's one of my favourites. It's probably why I've said so much about it. And because when they're like, why? When Dee's finally found out and finally goes for this slight ordeal where Rhys kind of makes him touch the Scone, which he knows isn't the real one.
the fake
Scone,
real one.
But yeah, it's... And then Dee finally breaks down, and Albrecht comes in and says, no, this is real. Dee breaks down, and Dee sort of rounds on Chiri and goes, because of her. And Dee has always been quite scathing with any kind of female pronoun, because of her. And it's like, why did she get to be like that? Why are they like that? I think, the female dwarves more generally. And you're like, okay, it's about hatred. But then it's like, oh, but I can't. And everyone's like, wait, what? But once I was reading this... here in the UK in 2026 just felt really strongly to me about some stuff. So I'm just going to put a warning here that we will be discussing transphobia in the UK. Talking about this, and we're both cisgender people, but certainly I've been in like queer-friendly online spaces basically my whole adult life. And my habit is usually to listen to people when they're talking about their experiences. So I've seen this rise of transphobia in the UK from when it was like this weird kind of small and right through to now where it's captured a lot of our institutions. So if this is something you're dealing with, something you already know about and you don't want to listen to it, then jump ahead a few minutes, and when I'm editing I will say how much that is. Over to editing, Kathy.
Thanks, past me. Just jump ahead about 11.5 minutes.
If this is not something that you're aware of or something that's very peripheral or you just don't know about, I'd ask if maybe you do listen, because I think it's quite important to talk about. So what we have here is Dee, who's in the dwarven hierarchy's very important position, who has basically allied with, let's face it, fascists, to destroy something that is so important, like a symbol of their culture, just because they hate other people so much. Just reading that really hit me, because that's what a lot of the transphobia we have in the UK is. I'm going to use the term transphobia. I know there's other terms that those groups of people use. Gender critical is one. There's a few others, but I'm just going to say it because it is what it is. It's transphobia. That's what's happening. It just really hit me like, oh, the UK's in a horrible place with this. And it's just been getting worse and worse. There's a lot of money being given to transphobic groups. And the thing is, and this is where the aligning fashion comes from, a lot of that money is coming from, the groups that we know are being supported by, the sort of Christian right wing, the evangelical communities in the US. People who, frankly, as a woman, I'm terrified of, because they would happily take away reproductive rights. They would happily, basically feminism push back. And the problem is that they sort of dress up the idea that, trans rights are opposed to women's rights, and that, we're not transphobic, we just want to protect women. And it's like, how are women protected when we're all being policed by what we look like, which already happens anyway? This is the thing. There is nothing about trans people, particularly trans women, because again, a lot of these people focus very much on trans women.
Trans men don't exist in their world, I don't think.
Well, I think they're just women that are doing the wrong thing. But any woman that supports trans rights is then doing the wrong thing. Yeah. Even though actually that is a majority opinion in the UK. Most people are trans supportive or don't really care particularly. But unfortunately, these groups, they're very vocal, and they have captured so many institutions. They have captured, institutions that are meant to protect human rights in the UK have transphobes in them. BBC News has, not the whole BBC, and there is still, some positive content, different parts of it, but certainly BBC News will quite often use incredibly offensive language recently to describe trans women. Mm-hmm. And it just makes you sick. There was a recent judgment from the Supreme Court that related to a specific thing, but anytime there's something that seems to go against trans people, they all rush out and act like they're illegal now. And they just all say, we have concerns. But they're just people who hate other people and want them taken out of public life. And a lot of people have pointed out very accurately that this is, rehash, or a lot of it's recycled homophobia from stuff in the 80s and 90s, which, I can remember the tail end of that in the noughties a bit. And there's been all this progress, and they're just pushing back. And policing any group of women is bad for all of us. There's this kind of very silly idea that trans women they're very femme, and they only have this very surface level idea of being women, which is ridiculous, because if you're being constantly judged for what you look like, hello, that's a very, very female experience across the board, if I'm honest. Yeah. But there's people used to have to socially transition before they could medically or legally transition. And I've heard of stuff going back to the 90s even, where people were a bit like, well, the way the system was set up meant that women, in order to get the treatment they needed, they'd have to doll up a bit, So, I've heard of trans women being told off wearing trousers.
Go to the extreme of the gender.
You have to be very femme. It's like, I can wear trousers all the time. No one makes a comment. Why would they? Susie Eddie Izzard makes a good point in stand-up she had from years ago, which is that if skirts are for women and trousers are for men, then most women are cross-dressing. And I'm like, fair enough. As a person who wears jeans most of the time, very rarely wears a skirt. But again, no one bothers me about that. But the point is, you had to socially transition, and now they're kind of targeting social transition. It's this sort of this idea that you have to look a certain amount of femme, and they're actually having more freedom for trans people will make things more dangerous. But countries that have self-ID already have had no increase in any kind of stuff that people are claiming they have legitimate concerns about, and it's just kind of a way in.
Did you not know that toilet doors magically will repel people of the wrong gender from them?
Well, that's not true, because I've definitely accidentally walked into the wrong clubs on occasion. That's urinal turning around.
The whole.
Also, that's not even a legal thing. It's just a sign on the door.
I know, but this is the big one of their big things of you wouldn't want a trans woman in the same toilets. It's like because who knows what might happen. It's like. But I could just walk in, and if I had nefarious goals, anyone can walk in.
Well, again, it's a bit of a nonsense thing. I was going to say, there's been, and again, this all just kind of came out of nowhere. There was no sudden load of attacks in public toilets, except that's not quite true. What there was an increase of, and continues to be an increase of, is people who have decided that they get to decide what a stranger's gender is, challenging strangers in the toilet and bullying them because they don't like how they look. And you know what? That happens to cis women because there are a lot more of us. And you know what? We don't all look whatever this random stranger's idea of feminine is. I mean, I've heard of women with short hair feeling like they had to grow it out so they could use the toilet. But now it's more and more because they've been emboldened.
And also, She Who Shall Not Be Named wrote a book about, had this as the main plot point in one of her...
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people... I mean, that's another example of the money behind this.
Right.
So, I mean, another terrible thing is that in December of 2025... one day after the other, two leading UK women's organisations turned around and said, we have to stop accepting trans people because of legal threats. And it's not illegal for them to accept it, but basically it's very clear that the transphobic group decided to take their money and I don't think they're just targeting the organisations, they're targeting the people running it. And I mean, I'm sure the fact that one day after the other, like, the cruelty is the point with these people. That's why it's very cruel and horrible.
Yeah.
You know, if people actually have concerns and you sort of point to, like, countries where they have stuff and go, look, it's fine. If they just had concerns, they'd be like, oh, okay, fair enough. But they don't. These are people who are bigots. They hate trans people, particularly trans women. And they're just pretending it protects women to kind of get away in. It's this scapegoating of a small group who've never actually really been the problem, who are more vulnerable, you know. Trans women are more vulnerable to housing insecurity, they're more vulnerable to domestic violence, they're more likely to be attacked and harassed and assaulted than cisgender women. I mean, it's not great for any of us, but it's worse for them by any measure. And the things they sort of act like trans is this new, like, modern thing. But, I mean, even if you don't know the history of, you know, people who don't fall into the gender binary existing across civilizations and history for thousands of years, suggesting it's very much a human constant, much like, again, not being straight is as well, even if people have different words for it. If you think about, like, you know, in, like, one of the early Big Brothers, the winner was a trans woman. And everyone outside the Big Brother house knew she was trans, and the people inside the Big Brother house didn't. And it was sort of mentioned as, oh, here's the thing. But that was fine. Coronation Street for years had, admittedly played by a cisgender woman, but a transgender character, a trans woman character on there who's a major character. I mean, even back in 2018, Theresa May was actually kind of pushing for self-ID. But I think because government looking at it that way, that kind of caused all these, you know, horrible transphobic people to sort of push back. And of course, they have a lot more resources than the rest of us. There's also probably something here about everyone's always concerned about whether young men are being radicalised online, which, I mean, they are in some respects.
They are, definitely.
But that is definitely a concern. But no one's really looked at the fact that a lot of women of various ages in this kind of sphere have been radicalised. And the problem is, once you become the kind of person who has this utter disgust for like a group of humans, your fellow humans, that disgust can spread. So a lot of these people end up being homophobic, much as they claim they're apparently protecting lesbians. There's a lot of people who try to kind of create groups where they say, oh, we're for gay rights, but not trans rights or something. A lot of them end up being racist. And again, that's the other thing. A lot of these ideas of what makes someone feminine are very much based on, like, white women.
Yeah.
So, and certain beauty standards, which do not apply across the world or across, you know, people of different ethnic groups. And so this is why kind of reading about somebody allying with fascists to destroy, you know, a big part of what should be part of their identity, it just really hit me, you know. They kind of act like they're victims while scapegoating a small group. But again, you know, they've got all this money, they've brought down trans-inclusive organisations, overturned these policies. Yeah, and I mean, really, it's a bit of a worry when people just have enough money to go to another group. Well, you should do what I believe and not what you believe. I mean, if you try talking to any of these people, which I've only done very occasionally online,
it's
and then
worth it sometimes.
No, but somebody made the point. Well, if you're a cisgender woman, ask them what is it that giving trans people rights affects me, because it doesn't. Yeah. And I tried this with somebody and basically mentioned, well, what if you were assaulted in jail? And I'm like, I'm not in jail. And this is the problem. They always want to scare you. They'll just use, like, assault as, like, a thing to try and scare. And it wasn't until later I thought, God, that's a horrible thing to say to a stranger, isn't it? So, you know, you're a bit like, it's not worth talking to this person. They're clearly the rot has set in. Yeah, and they're in our government. They're in our media. It's just awful. So I just want to say it.
That's fair enough.
And,
I think it goes...
I've signed that. There's a thing called Not in Our Name, which they encourage cisgender women to sign.
I think it goes without saying, if you don't believe us now, we will say trans rights are human rights, trans women are women, trans men are men,
Non-binary people are valid.
Yes.
Because that's the other thing. They're saying it's just about this, but then they start... I've seen stuff where people start being weird about non-binary folk. I've seen stuff where people start being weird about asexuals, which is like, well, they're bothering no one. Why is that a thing you'd be? And again, I mean, a lot of them, will
They don't
have other
understand.
prejudice.
They don't.
Well,
It's so against their worldview of...
This one, I think there's an element of, like, you see somebody who clearly has a very different kind of life, a different experience, different identity to you, and maybe you feel uncomfortable. And that happens. That's very normal and human. That's a bit different. But it's on you to sort of, like, notice that discomfort and either just kind of ignore it and go on like a regular person, just being regular and normal and civil and sort of believing people when they tell you who they are. But I think some people don't like that discomfort and take that discomfort as an attack. And even though it's like no one's done anything to them. I mean, God, there was that woman who got hounded out of the NHS.
Yes.
And the court actually found that the nurse that made the complaint against her had harassed her, but she's the one who doesn't have a job in the NHS anymore.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's all really poisonous and horrible. And I think some people want there to be, they want to feel like they're doing good by being awful, by being bullies. Anyway, yes.
Move back to Pratchett now, but
Yes.
if anyone...
Well, I mean, the gender critical people tried to claim Pratchett was on their side, and everyone was like... Although, as we've seen, I think you can read these books and get very different things from it, but
Yes.
at least his daughter was like, no. So... Anyway, having that in there, it just hit me in a different kind of way than when I was younger. Well, if we go into the thing with Dee as a closet case, which that feels a bit odd.
Yeah, I think we're dealing with something that's...
It's a bit of a trope in some
it is a
respects.
trope.
More in the gay kind of area.
And I don't know whether it was so tropey when he was writing, but I think it's always been...
Maybe.
Yeah.
I feel like some of it's seen more recently in things.
But I think it didn't need to be. I think there was enough power in someone who is so traditional dwarfish, willing to destroy, ally with
werewolves
fascists
to destroy their
who are
most sacred cultural icon.
who are not necessarily like the trolls of their mortal enemy, but they are still a significant...
Well, they're a power in the region, aren't they?
And yes, and to destroy one of the cornerstones of their society in order to I don't think it needed for her to be also...
Well, and again, you say her, this is the things with... So when Cheery was first kind of came out, there was a bit where he was used in the narrative up until Angua says the thing, then it just says Cheery for a bit, and then it starts saying she. Yeah. So it's like, okay, that's definitely... With this, when Dee's a bit like, why do they get to, when I can't, and kind of breaks down a bit, so you're like, oh, so Dee is female, or wants... I mean, again, with dwarves, it's a bit like, no one knows what's under the leather and armour, that's a thing that's always said. So Dee wants to be female?
Wants to express themselves.
Yeah. So, and everyone's a bit like, oh, okay. And I think, again, I don't know if it was a trope at the time it was being written, but certainly a thing I've seen, again, more with I guess, it's quite often like teenage stuff and coming of age stuff where you have like a character who's openly gay and then they get bullied for that. Because homophobia does still exist, obviously. Although, again, a lot of it's now recycled as transphobia, which is awful, but there we go. But then it turns out that the character that's been bullying them actually is attracted to them, didn't know what to do with it, and so they've become like a bigot or a bully based on that, which... And that was, I think that feels a bit uncomfortable now, because it's a bit like, oh, well, they were just having trouble. It's like, well, you can have trouble with your own identity without being awful or destroying stuff.
Yeah.
Or it's one of these stories which I've seen and I'm a bit like, oh, okay. Like there's one, I think it was even in Glee, where like a homophobic bully then tries to kiss one of the characters and people are like, oh, it turns out he was gay like you all along. He's like, well, no, he was a bully, and like then and now he's kissed me and that feels gross. So again, it's like, well, that's not boundaries either.
No. I suppose in this case that it doesn't...
I think the issue is that then the narrative starts saying she and everyone starts saying she, but Dee does not
self-identify.
Dee did not say you can call me she. Dee had been angry at she the whole time, and sure, there are reasons for that. But like everyone started saying, "Oh, her and she," and I'm like, "Well, she's not asked you to do that."
Yeah, but
he's not asked you.
I mean, I think it could be worse if it was more at this point in the plot. Dee goes off into the south, and we don't really interact with the character or anything about. So I mean, it's a small.
Yeah, it's right towards the end, and again, I think how one navigates this was not something I think was a big conversation at that time. No. I guess generally. But yeah, I just felt a bit odd this time. But one thing there is, though, is that Cheery's asked to leave, which is then when the Low King reveals the great secret of dwarfdom. which obviously Cheery can't know. Although if Cheery did, then would Cheery be in line for the throne or something, or one of the contenders?
Possibly.
I think it only worked when they did that, hundreds of years before. But Cheery says, "Oh, I'd like to go talk to Dee," and everyone's like, "Oh, okay." And she's like, "I think she needs somebody to talk to," and it's like, "Oh, that's nice," considering that Cheery's the main person Dee was yelling at. Yeah. Did Dee use the slur?
I believe
so.
Yes.
Yeah. So there we go. But then later, bless her, Sybil says to Cheery, "Oh, I thought it was so nice how you went and sat with her." And Cheery looks at Sebastian and goes, "Here you are, sir," and hands Vimes a list of names of many high-profile dwarves in the Ankh-Morpork community who were in on the plot. Because obviously there has been an Ankh-Morpork element for them to have made stolen the replica, done this, and also murdered the rubber maker. So, and Cheery looks a bit embarrassed and goes, "It's just really hard to stop being a copper." So it's a bit like, Dee was maybe helping or maybe just pumping for information. But either way, the conspirators are on a piece of paper and Vimes is aware, so that's something. Sometimes in fantasy, people who are organising these things get their just desserts.
Yes.
If only reality could be more that way.
Well, yes.
At the end, at the coronation, when Cheery's in the traditional dwarf dress and Rhys is...
Which is not actually a dress, just...
Sorry, dwarf clothes. It's like when they say dress uniform. Although I will say in Star Trek, they do appear to just be wearing gowns or frocks.
I mean...
I was like, is that what this means?
I mean, I think some militaries would benefit from their leaders being in dresses, anyway, we're digressing at that point.
Okay, that's random, sure. And actually, there's the bit where Vimes gets those names, and there's something that Vimes says about, it was this big picture, something a small picture. He says, when it's a big picture, the criminals just flow through your fingers, which again feels very relevant.
Yeah.
But yes, at the coronation, Rhys is giving a load of historic handshakes, including shaking the hand of a troll and shaking the hand of a openly female dwarf. So that's quite historic, and Vimes sort of thinks about, well, it might not mean anything, but the ripples will spread out. But Rhys does ask Cheery for the name of her dressmaker and says that he might have some business for her. And it's like, did the king just...
Well, what the king gets up to in the privacy of his quarters is entirely up to him.
Well, true, but on the other hand, he did just say that in front of everyone.
True,
the same as the handshake. And the Vimes also at that point gets Trigger's axe, or the axe of Theseus.
The axe of Theseus, yes. I like the idea. I mean, we've had Trigger's broom come into the more forefront after the ship of Theseus being mentioned in WandaVision.
Oh, sure.
But yes, most of the UK would know of Trigger's broom.
I actually knew that one more, and for some reason, despite my classical education, had not really heard of the ship of Theseus as a thing until that episode.
But yeah, I think it is a nice idea of handing down a heirloom that may not be 100% the original, but it is still spiritually the original.
Yes, so because Rhys gives Vimes the axe of his grandfather, and says, well, it may have had a new handle, and it may have had a new blade, and it may have had some different decoration.
I thought it was a new axe. I thought it was a new axe that would become.
No, he's giving Vimes the axe of his grandfather. So the point is that Rhys had sort of explained...
Well, he mentioned it earlier, so I'm just...
I don't know if we mentioned it earlier, though.
Okay, but no,
okay. So the point is, it's kind of a metaphor for the true nature of the Scone, because... what Vimes and Sybil get to find out, because Vimes is like, they've made a replica in Ankh-Morpork and they've destroyed the real one, and the replica is around, and they'll bring that in, and then they'll say, look, it's a fake, and Rhys can't be king, and that's the conspiracy. But then when Dee is getting them to check the Scone, saying it's not real, then Albrecht comes in, and he's like he's Rhys's opponent in the kingship, and also is an expert on the Scone. Him and his whole family have been. So he sniffs it and he touches it and tastes a little bit and goes, oh no, this is the original. And then Vimes is very tired. It's like, what? And then they have the whole thing with Dee. And then when Cheeri's left, Rhys explains that the original Scone, which again was this great mythical thing and had a bit of the truth in it, collapsed after a few hundred years. And what happened was that the very high-up dwarves that were there when it happened, and the reason Rhys is one of the high dwarves in his family, is that he is the the descendant of a guard who happened to be in the room when it happened. So they're like, oh no, so they baked enough of them quietly, and they have to bake them every so often. And in fact, this one was probably going to need replacing in about 50 years anyway. So they've just kind of brought up the timeline. But this is the first time they've had one that's been made in Ankh-Morpork, which, as discussed, is a major dwarf city. So Rhys is like fine with this and sort of explains that this is, and then obviously Sybil has the whole thing where she gets in her trade negotiations.
It is a new axe.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
I thought...
Here we go.
Because I remember that Rhys sort of showed Vimes the axe and explained like it's still my grandfather's axe, even though every bit of it's been changed.
Here's the quote. Well then, I will give something to your descendants, said the king, apparently unperturbed. A long flat box was brought to him. He opened it to reveal a dwarf axe, the new metal glinting in its nest of black cloth. This will become, in time, the axe of someone's grandfather, said the king, and no doubt over the years it will need a new handle or a new blade, and over the centuries the shape will change in line with fashions, but it will always be, in every detail and respect, the axe I gave you today.
Oh, okay. I think I thought he gave him his axe.
No, it is a new one to become.
Okay, yes. And it's also interesting how, everyone thought that Albrechtsen, because I think Vimes even says, well, surely Albrechtsen is Albrechtsen knows he can, you guys oppose stuff. And Rhys is a bit like, well, after I'm crowned, I expect Albrechtsen to be my biggest critic and to cause my problem, but he understands that this is dwarfdom, that there must be this continuity. And I think that's what Dee didn't have. I mean, again, Albrechtsen's from a family where they kind of knew the truth, so... But again, the truth. The whole point was the Scone had the truth in it, and it was all a lie, and yes. the Scone is a lie. But yes. Anyway, we've done a lot of dwarf stuff.
We have a lot of dwarf stuff.
So shall we move on to some of the other bits from the books?
Yes.
So next I thought was, shall we talk about the Igors?
Igors! Yes, mistress! So let's just put my best. Yes, we have more Igors, lots of Igors, in fact, all of which are called Igor, which is one of those long-running jokes of no, not that Igor, the other Igor, which is
Vimes is not used to it at first. It's interesting they don't have one in the dwarf mine, but every grand house has one. So obviously Vimes meets the embassy one, and then one at the vampire house, one at the werewolf house. And the first time he doesn't really understand what's happening, and after a while he's starting to notice the pattern and stitches.
Yeah, and the slight intonations on the lisp gives away which Igor it is, I'm sure, which you can't do on in words.
I mean, the fact that every not just every S, but every even soft C or something that might make an S sound, which is quite a few things in English because it's a silly language, has a th in it.
Yeah.
Means you can almost hear it when you're reading, and I think this is where Pratchett's really getting into. I suppose in the previous book. Obviously, going back to the Uberwald duology thing, there was an Igor, which had it, and you also had an Macfeagle, which is obviously, again, a very kind of like, I'm going to put the language right on the page. So I feel like Pratchett's feeling much more comfortable with doing this sort of thing to identify groups.
Yeah, and they're an interesting bunch. Though another one without a significant female representation. That
gets later. But yes, I do feel like when Pratchett introduced it, it was like, right, what are the men like? And then later it's like, oh yes, women also.
They should have some ladies. But yes, they're and Vimes looks to encourage one to come to Ankh-Morpork because these are excellent surgeons
and healers.
Healers.
So, I mean, Wolfgang basically slices up Captain Tantony and Carrot at the confrontation outside the werewolf castle before he's knocked off the bridge, and they're in a very bad way. And then Tantony's up and about, Carrot's in bed but seems to be doing well, and Vimes like, that's amazing. And the fact is, they kind of have this, they're brilliant servants, but they also have this kind of community surgery thing. So the thing is self-surgery, so, they won't do anything that they wouldn't, to somebody else they wouldn't do to themselves. Yeah. There's the idea, which I think, again, was mentioned in Carpe Jugulum, of, passing down body parts and,
I have my grandfather's eyes.
In Uberwald, they're part of the community, and they're actually very well respected. There's a lot of woods. And as Vimes thought but could not see, presumably a lot of people work in the woods, but there's people chopping things and stuff. And so, this idea that if you damage yourself, an Igor will heal you, but then they'll also be a bit like, but later we will need something from you. And I think it's Sherry mentions they have these little cards. People are like, oh, donor cards. And the idea of recycling and reusing, it's a circular economy, but for that, but for body parts. And
I think it's great because unfortunately with the embassy, Igor does perish And the funeral is basically them, the local Igors all coming along and
with ice buckets.
Yeah, and basically taking away the various parts either from him or that he's had in storage to then share out.
And in fact, as in his dying breaths, he's saying to Vimes, right, this eagle needs this eagle needs that, tell this eagle this. So, like, they're not so much leaving wills as inventors.
Yes.
And yeah, it was kind of the opposite of when people go to a funeral wake and bring food in a Tupperware. It's like, well, now we've taken some stuff away. But then Vimes does mention, that he'd be interested in somebody coming to Ankh-Morpork, and so we then get a slightly younger Igor.
Yes, still vaguely new, still got only a few scars, but very modern thinking.
Which makes him less good as a servant in traditional Uberwald.
Yes, he's not very. She'll call no man master. He only lisps a little bit, but yes, but he has a jar of noses. Ready for
swim about.
Yeah, with little legs on them.
It just occurs to me that in Our Flag Means Death, there's that character has a nose jar, but that's the more traditional thing.
Yeah. And he said, and
my noses.
Is basically asked, what happens, what about the feet when they just drop off after you've been attached.
I mean, I did wonder what kind of thing do you have where people lose noses a lot and need them reattached. But then I remembered that actually historically that was quite often a thing that happened with syphilis, to the point where noblemen would have to disappear from society because it attacks the soft tissues. So the nose is quite often a thing to go. And I think an early version of transplanting or blood transfusion was a thing where I thought this was probably in Italy. It feels like a Renaissance thing where they'd actually kind of get the vein in your arm or something because they realised if you put the skin on it doesn't live, but they'd attach. They'd do something. I did read about it, and there was an old-fashioned looking illustration where somebody basically had their nose attached to top of their arm, like they were kind of almost sniffing their own armpit. But it was so the blood from the vein in the arm or the artery in the arm could kind of nourish the kind of replacement skin on the nose. I don't know exactly. It was early medicine is quite alarming.
It is
sounding,
yes.
and this is a little bit more I think. Perhaps taking bits of that, but also the whole obviously Hammer horror Igor Frankenstein type thing. Because what young Igor also has is a many-eared rabbit.
Yes.
In that it's I think a regular rabbit, but then it's got a lot of human ears growing along its back.
And you never know when an ear is going to come in handy.
Which I assume is a reference to that mouse with the ear on its back.
Yes.
Which I think was new-ish at the time this book was being written.
Yes, contemporary certainly.
Yes,
So.
I think it was some years after that the ear mouse. Anyway, I think that's just the thing they did show they could do it. I don't feel that's the thing that often happens.
No, I think it's just proof of concept. I'm not sure what the concept was. Other than have an ear on your mouth.
I guess it's like with Dolly the sheep. It's look, we can do this now. It's oh, okay. It's those sheep, all sheep look the same to me, but fine.
I think it was just kind of show that you could create a sort of cartilage structure and put flesh and it would sort of live and be up,
But the mouse couldn't hear through that ear because it was
definitely.
Just a weird cartilage shape on its back, not an additional ear. So mice really have very good hearing. But yes, there will be an Igor in the watch soon.
Yes, we'll get extra eagles.
Do we want to go into talking more generally about Uberwald? Since this is kind of the second Uberwald book?
We do see more of Uberwald.
This is even more Uberwald than Carpe Jugular.
We see what we now know to be an early Uberwald in which is abroad when they go through and accidentally kill a vampire.
I mean, yeah, I think that was just the whole story thing going, what if they're in a vampire story? Or that, that thing where you travel through somewhere and all the locals the castle, close the shutters.
Yes, I mean, it was, but obviously, given we know that Lanka is close to Uberwald, that's obviously, so, but that was a very, very much a classic vampire thing. And then we saw more of it in t'other book. Thank you very much. Where we only really saw this one castle and the one.
It's just kind of one. It's just the bit the count has.
Yeah, just the very.
Which I can't now remember what the piece of land the count is because if it's a duke, it's a duchy. It's a county. I guess is that why we have those? Anyway, probably. But the impression you get with Uberwald is that it is very much this confederation of lots of little kingdoms and fiefdoms and principalities and duchies and counties, if that's what it is. And basically it's meant to kind of be, it's sort of a bit Germanic, it's a bit Low Countries. I'm listening to a lot of history podcasts at the moment, so which is basically kind of Belgium, Netherlands, but also quite Eastern European, again with the whole... I mean, the name Uberwald is kind of, if you were doing a different translation of Transylvania. Yeah. It means the same thing, just in a different kind of language. There's a dash of Russia in there as well. And, and it's very unlike Ankh-Morpork. So again, we've got another thing where Vimes is made to go somewhere that isn't Ankh-Morpork and hates it intensely, and then has to run around in it. And it's winter, so it's snowy and there's woods, and he's there like, maybe a woods person would understand this, like I understand the streets. But I don't know what the moss on these trees means. And where are the woodcutters? I feel like if you're a woodcutter in those woods and you hear the wolves, you're like, I'm not going to work today.
Sick day. Wolf day.
Like a snow day.
Yes.
But with werewolves.
But there's always snow, so you can't really have that.
Well, I don't think we're seeing it in summer. But it's interesting, when Vimes is going up there on the coach, he's been given like a packet of information as a briefing. And it mentions the Unholy Empire, which is clearly a reference to the Holy Roman Empire, which, to quote Queen's podcast, was a state of mind in that it was not a contiguous empire that connected. It was just lots of little bits of land owned by the Holy Roman Empires, the Holy Roman Emperors, and it's a bit of a messy sort of thing at different points. One thing that did amuse me quite a bit was when it's talking about the diet of bugs.
Nom, nom, nom.
And your Vine's a bit like they were so desperate they had to eat bugs, which is clearly a reference to, and I may be mispronouncing this, the DA of verms. So verms, which is spelt like worms in English, but it's clearly verms, I think it's now in Germany, which again, obviously, was also a lot of like little bits that were their own territories. It's spelt like diet, but it's actually DA, I think, or something, which just means like a kind of meeting. But basically, that was... So the DA of Worms was when Martin Luther was called to answer a papal bull by the Holy Roman Empire rather than the Pope specifically. And that was the point at which he refused to, and that's kind of when Protestantism got started. I mean, there was some stuff before that where people like, oh, this is probably kind of when it started for him, but like that's when he explicitly said no to the Pope. So that's what is in our history. In Uberwald, it seems to be kind of, again, a big... It does say, like, diet means, like, bugs as a place, and diet is, like, a big meeting. It was where they decided they would stop mining silver and they would stop farming garlic.
Yes.
Growing garlic. Do you farm garlic? Probably.
I think
Cultivating
it, yes.
And in fact, Vime's looking, it says, oh, well, because you've got the werewolves, you've got the vampires and dwarves, and Vime's like, oh, the humans aren't mentioned. It's like, well, humans are quite a minority in Uberwald and not really important, which again is obviously the opposite to his experience. It doesn't mention the kind of like the Pixies and the Centaurs and the Phoenixes, like the characters we saw coming out in
the more supernaturally races, yeah.
But yeah, it's clear that where Vimes goes, the city, town, Bonk, is clearly quite central because, you've got the dwarf mine there and you've got some other stuff. And I think the Count from Carpe-Juglum very much has its own little bit that presumably was on the edge by Lanka and that bit. But it's interesting, there's a whole thing there, but whether the law isn't important, the law, L-A-W, isn't important, just the law, L-O-R-E. So, and Vimes gets the strong feeling of being away from civilization, particularly when the Clax Towers get sabotaged.
Yeah.
He can't, call home. There's also a bit where Vetinari describes it as a mystery wrapped in an enigma, and then later Colon says he has heard where it's like a misery wrapped in an enema. One little bit else like there was it said the butcher can be hanged if his sausages aren't 100% meat, which I found quite funny because I think that's a reference to the food rules they have in Germany because as somebody who can't have gluten, sausages in the UK can be a bit hit and miss because we have a tradition of putting rust and stuff that I can't eat in sausages, which is not, I'm told, when they used to fill things with sawdust, but it's just a legitimate style of sausage we have here. But they don't have that in Germany, and I can eat all the sausages in Germany. And when we went to Berlin, I ate a lot of currywurst. So
they also sell a lot of currywurst on the street, making it easy to buy. So
I mean, that's kind of they really want you to eat that in Berlin. They just put it everywhere.
Yeah.
But yes, so, and then the kind of Russian-y bit was obviously the gloomy trousers of Uncle Vanya, which was, the sisters talking about how it used to be and, the big city. They kind of vaguely talk about Ankh-Morpork, be like, I think that's really about St. Petersburg because it's based on the Chekhov play, The Cherry Orchard, which I can't remember if we already mentioned in the first part, but yes, I have seen that once. So it was kind of enough for me to understand that's what it was
Excellent.
about.
I knew it was something Russian, and that was about as far as I went.
This feels very Russian, that's all I have.
Yeah,
so, I guess talking of majority groups in Uberwald, we've done dwarves, we've done werewolves. Shall we just do a quick thing on the vampires? Obviously, the last book was very vampire, and there were two different types, but here there's only Lady Margalotta, but
I mean,
a
she's
minor
not,
character.
Yeah, she's not a major character, but I think a lot of, as was
Quite significant.
She's significant for not only in this book but also for vampires going forward in the series.
Yeah.
So, she's obviously one of the sort of political movers and shakers within Uberwald. She's been around for a bit, so, that's...
Vampires tend to have been. I mean, she's clearly got a history of veterinary, so...
Yeah, that's been mentioned a few times.
Because it's, like, at the beginning, it shows her and then the werewolves getting the news that Vimes is... Well, no, she's trying to figure out who he'll send, is asking for files on different people from the Ankh-Morpork diplomatic corps, and then she's like, wait a second, would he? And she's like, get me a file on Vimes. Whereas the alternative is Seraphine von Uberwald, the werewolf, is immediately dismissive because you never heard of Vimes from Sybil's letters, which are obviously, a proud wife's version of things. But actually, when Lady Margalotta hears that it's Vimes being sent, she actually punches the air. Yes. I think because she thinks that she knows it'll be interesting, and because I think she has such respect for veterinary, because they clearly had some sort of background there. And in fact, Vimes sort of mentions that. And it's clear that at some point, a young veterinary went to Uberwald, charmed this, old vampire lady, and got her hooked on politics.
Yep.
Which is interesting. Just adds to the man's mythos.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing, is that it's the phrase Black Ribboner isn't used. That's not a term until the next book. But Lady Margalotta does reveal to Vimes, in the language of a former alcoholic, that she doesn't drink blood anymore, that she is sober and has been, 4 years, which isn't that long for a vampire. But it does show her going to a meeting that is very much like Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's an interesting, shift for vampires. It's not so much it's the power thing rather than it's the blood is power.
That's what Granny
politics
said.
Is power.
Well, that's what Granny said in Carpe Jugulum, that you can get blood from anything. It's power over people. And it seems that Lady Margalotta has transferred the kind of blood-sucking thing over to, political manoeuvring and having control that way. But it's interesting, we have somebody here who, again, is very influenced by veterinary, but in a seemingly more reciprocal and certainly less unhinged way than some other characters we have seen and will see, who are a bit obsessed with veterinary in some way or another. Lord Hong comes to mind. The various royal plots, maybe not exactly focused on veterinary, but he's part of, he's the one they're kind of aiming for, and then we'll see more going forward. But yes, it's quite fun when Vimes goes to her house, because it sort of seems to be Cottagecore meets Addams Family.
It's an interesting choice, but certainly I could see it working for her.
There's doilies, but also lots of bats. So she has I think it's like a pink fluffy jumper, but with bat symbols. So there's lots of bat shapes, but it's very cosy. I did see a little while ago, there was an author on BlueSky, and I can't remember who it was, who posted a picture of their home, and in the outtext they sort of described it as like a vampire lair, but pink. And I was like, oh, that's like Lady Margalotta. But yeah, so she's mixing cozy with vampire, but it's kind of like how Cheeri's mixing feminine with dwarf.
Yeah, you can take bits and pieces and mash them together, and it usually works for you.
Yes. But I feel like she's, obviously, Carpe Jugulum had these two, they had kind of like the old school vampire and then the kind of sort of more group of modern vampires. And I feel like Lady Margalotta doesn't fall into either of those things, but I think Pratchett's good at showing there are individuals within it. So he sort of shows kind of what the group is, or takes your expectations of what the group is. But then he's good at picking out individuals and, sort of showing how people can be different even if they're within the group.
Yeah.
One thing that we get again here, I think more strongly than before, is Vimes's antipathy towards vampires. I think when Angia was first in the Watch, and there was that thing where we thought it was just that she was a woman, but actually it was werewolf, but undead. Which, I mean, again, we can argue if we think werewolves are really undead, but I guess,
no.
Well, in fairness, they all come back from being clearly killed in this. So I think that's where that kind of, although again, undead doesn't necessarily make much sense of the term. It's stuff from Hammer Horror, because that's the other thing Uberwald with. It's Horrorland.
Yes.
But yes, it's Vimes. He accepted Angua, and she's part of his community, and he's actually very proud. So at one point when she's fighting with Wolfgang, she sort of sives his legs out from underneath him, and he thinks, oh, I taught her that, which is nice. So even though she's a werewolf, but he's fine, she's part of his community, but he's already said he will not have vampires in the Watch. And then at one point after he's visited everyone, he's like, the only person that was at all pleasant to me, or was at all straightforward, was the goddamn vampire. So Vimes clearly expects not to like these people. I mean, it's a prejudice, but considering how vampires often behave,
it's understandable.
But again, the same is true of werewolves, except Angua. So, but again, But this is the first time he's heard of one being sober, and that's only towards the end of the book. Lady Margalotta said, one is one too many.
Yeah.
And he being, an alcoholic is a bit like, he sort of understands that. But I think it's also that she's very involved. So what happens is he kind of confronts her about this. Because so when he's in the dwarf mine and sort of trapped and in prison, then he escapes. But he's been given a weapon. So clearly they intended him to kill somebody on his way out. Or probably not to get out necessarily. And he's stuck in there's this big shaft. So she flies, because that's the other thing vampires can fly, is she flies down and lifts him out. But then she does just leave him in the snow where the werewolves find him. So it's help, but not all the help.
No.
But then when Vimes is thinking, well, will Wolfgang come back? Or he died, but then he wasn't killed by fire or silver, so they can come back. But then he comes back, and Vimes says to her, it's like, well, it occurs to me, how could he get up the waterfall? You would have to fly for that. And she says, well, if Vimes had left, which, I mean, obviously he was, leaving fairly soon after the coronation, then Wolfgang would have come back and he would still have been a problem. And in fact, Angua had said similar. This is what Angua was so scared about. She fought him off to an extent, but he still kind of beat her, but, she kind of saw him off a bit, but was badly injured. But she says she knows that Wolfgang will come back and he'll kill Carrot because Carrot belongs to Angua.
Yeah.
So that was what made her so upset. And so it's clear that Lady Margalotta was hoping Vimes will take him out, which she does do. But there's also the fact that, because if anyone locally dealt with it, that's war. The point is, this is a very uneasy thing. I mean, Vimes even says I've been sent to a war that isn't started yet. Both, I think, within the dwarf community and also within the Uberwald.
Vimes is the only person as an outsider with enough cachet to get away with it.
Well, the point is, if he doesn't then leaves, he's gone. Oh, a foreigner did it and then left, Oh, it's Ankh-Morpork, we're not Ankh-Morpork, So she kind of very ruthlessly created the conditions for this uneasy peace. Although, I mean, they do say that silver is being mined again, because Rhys gives out. Did he give out some silver rings or something?
To Lady Sybil.
Yes, that was it. Which
the first
silver mined in Uberwald since the diet of bugs.
Yeah.
It doesn't mention if garlics being grown.
That takes a bit longer.
Than forging silver?
They may well have known exactly where they would have known.
Well, I think the point is they weren't supposed to mine it. Yeah,
they could very easily go. Ding, ding, ding.
I mean, they're underground. I don't know how much they perhaps just had it there and it's like they're just not forging it. I mean, Cheery has that silver chainmail vest that she brought with her, although we assume that was quite ancestral.
Yes.
But yes. So again, it's sort of a bit more thing to a vampire. And again, we'll see more later about how when giving up bloods, vampires have to find a special interest to really focus in on.
Yes.
Which, yes, we will see more in the next book.
Makes them interesting characters. We get some interesting vampires.
So I think that's kind of the main big thematic things.
Yes.
I think there's just a few other bits and pieces one to mention, smaller stuff.
Smaller stuff. Oh well, slightly larger stuff. I'm gonna moan about the fat joke at the start. Sure. We do have another, and it's. I don't think it's a mean fat joke, but it is a poking fun at someone who is
it's less mean than the way Agnes was treated, but again, the person it's about is a man.
Yes, and this is all Johnson, Johnson, who is
very fat, like Agnes.
Talking to Colon at the start because he's being his
cart's been clamped, or one of his delivery drivers' cart's been clamped.
And this is about basically this man who is obviously very large. He obviously likes his food because he owns a restaurant.
The joke is when people look at him, they can't believe it's all Jolson.
Yeah.
That's the joke. The other joke, of course, which also isn't great, is this is a clear reference to Al Jolson. And when I read that, I was a bit like, is that who I think it is? And I looked it up, and yes, it is. So it's the guy that did the ukulele stuff, but he did also do blackface.
Yes.
Which is bad. And in fact, there's a bit when Colon's on a ladder when he first sees him because he's getting the pictures from the imp in the speed camera, and he looks down. It says something about he looks down into a brown face, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, it's like...
That can't be accidental.
No, and I don't know why we had this.
I guess because it was kind of like it's a reference. I mean, these books are full of references.
Yes.
We don't probably even see half of them, so it is in there, and it's just aged very poorly.
I think it's just a very badly aged. And
we discussed the fat phobia thing a lot in Masquerade.
Yes.
A little bit in Interesting Times.
I think it's
not a big thing here, but it has aged poorly.
I think it's also right near the start, which really is
Yeah, it's about, okay, is there more of it? I mean, I kind of half forgotten that, but like I remember all the big plot points and stuff. But it's also the fact that you've got, with both Jolson and Agnes, they're both obviously very fat. But then you have other characters like Nanny and Colon, who are there with them in the same scenes, and Colon's the only person Jolson talks to, in fact, who are fat and described as fat, but they're described as fat in a very neutral sort of way. So it's kind of like there's like, oh, well, you can be fat. Oh, but that's too fat, and now we've got to make a joke about it.
Yeah.
Or we've got to, like, make very clear that we don't agree with that amount of fatness, which none of us can see because it's in a book, and it's just described. And again, it's this very kind of really focusing on... And again, it doesn't even describe, like, specific body shape or anything, just massive size. Yeah, it's just going about the size. And it kind of seems a bit obsessive. I mean, we discussed before how this... I mean, again, the 90s were full of fat phobia. Darwin Jones is very bad for it. Most of her books have at least some fat phobic bit in. I do kind of wonder if there's kind of an element of it being like a boomer thing, or people who were in, or like just generation after World War II because of there being rationing for so long after.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think there's this maybe idea that people still want that you have to have your fair share. And of course there's this weird idea that people are only overweight because they are eating too much. Well, we know it's more complicated than that. In fact, there's research that's been done that shows that nowadays there's differences in people's microbiomes compared to like the 80s and earlier, which meant it would have been harder for people to gain weight and keep weight on back then than it is now. So there's that. There's, people are getting bigger. It's like, well, yeah. And there's also the fact that like cheap food is generally what's fattening. If you're in certain places, it's harder to get the food that isn't so fattening. So, I mean, so there's a lot of things to it. There's also epigenetics, which I only vaguely understand, but there's all this thing there. But I think there was definitely this idea for a good while that people are fat because they're eating too much, and that makes them greedy.
Yeah.
And so therefore you must shame them. And it's just bullying, really.
Yes.
But it's like a kind of bullying you can do where you're pretending you're showing concern for somebody, or you're pretending you're doing it for a better cause, which obviously relates to something that we mentioned earlier. So
Anyway.
But yeah, so that was a bit of a not great bit because yes, the fat joke, and also as I say, a reference to somebody who definitely did blackface, and then that character described as brown. I was like,
yeah.
No, don't love that. Should we go on to the lighter stuff now?
We'll go on to some fun stuff.
That was our main gripe, which I think isn't too bad.
No. Well,
it wasn't great, but there was just one.
We get another appearance of Leonard of Quirm, and Leonard of Quirm is a fun character. Mm-hmm.
I'd forgotten he was in it, actually, I must say.
It's just,
It's just a one-off.
I do like Veterinary goes to Leonard of Quirm because because obviously the clacks in sending messages, he needs some encryption. He needs ciphers to Veterinary knows...
Send messages that you don't want anyone to be able to read.
Veterinary knows about information control.
I think more than anyone.
He knows, especially with this new communication system, you need to be able to send things both securely, but also in a way that you know what the other person is receiving from you.
This is in fact what Veterinary is complaining about, because he goes to Leonard and says, these ciphers are unbreakable, and Leonard's like, yes, that's what you want. And he's like, no. I want ciphers that are merely fiendishly difficult to break, because if my enemies can't break my ciphers, I don't know what they think I'm thinking.
Yes.
So it's this whole, like, double bluff, triple bluff, like, lots of, layers and things.
It's very layered. You can't send things completely unencrypted because no one will believe it. Because I think, if it's important enough, But you also can't send something completely that they can't tell, because they'll know that you're communicating about something, but they don't know what it is. So you can't predict how they're going to react.
You need to be able to plant information.
So you need to be sending it enough that they would have to spend time decrypting it, and therefore believe that it is what you're actually doing, and believe themselves clever enough to decrypt it, and therefore act on that information in a way that you can then predict.
That was quite complicated, but yeah, sure.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So when Veterinary first comes in, Leonard is working on something which he describes as very fast coffee.
Yes. A very large machine that makes a lot of hissing, banging. explodes.
There's a brown liquid. Yes.
And makes some very good coffee.
Very fast coffee.
Yes, but it's also very good.
Yes, I do. But yes, that's not the joke.
Yes.
And then when talking about the ciphers, he makes the...
He has a wonderful device with lots of cogs and
Wheels.
dials and wheels. I now can't remember the exact naming for, but it's basically an Enigma machine. So yes, it is the engine for the neutralizing of information by the generation of miasmic alphabets.
Yes. So I think I didn't get that at all when I first read this as a teenager, and then I read it now and I was like, wait a second. I looked at it, I was like, oh, it's Enigma. Ugh. And you're just like, it's one of those things where there's been, like, you're just like, oh, for goodness sakes, Terry. Yeah, okay. Fair dues.
Yeah.
So that's quite fun. So other fun bits, Detritus as cultural attaché.
I mean, he is definitely cultural.
So he's trying to be fancy. They've covered him in a tuxedo, which I imagine was more sort of draped over and then kind of pinned in place. But he mentioned something about one of those parts where they have stories about chickens, which are cocktails. And then he's talking to a cultural guy from, I can't remember if it's Jenna or if it's Quirm, like one of those. He's gone a bit glazed-eyed because Trice is basically describing the opera house, and he's describing pictures, including one where he says, oh, well, there's a lady and a load of tiny flying babies. But he's just sort of describing them in his very straightforward kind of trollish way, which is kind of funny. Another bit I quite liked was at one point Vimes introduces Sybil as the Duchess of Bank. And she knows he hates being a duchess because that means it's a reminder that he's a duke. So if he's calling her duchess, she knows that's like a signal between them. She needs to out-Dutch everyone. So we get some proper duchessing in that Sybil immediately puts on this whole thing, like swoops in, hello, and is so gracious and effusive and kind, and it just distracts everyone because she's doing it very largely and effusively. And it's just quite good because obviously the main other duchess in the series is Susan, who has she ever gone back to Stow Heelot? I
mean,
like she doesn't want to be a duchess. She technically is one. She doesn't do anything duchessly. We don't even know who's running that like duchy that presumably her parents are putting a lot of effort into, because whatever I think they were doing was, I mean, that gets dropped completely. So like the duchess thing's almost a bit of an embarrassing thing, or like something she's forgotten about. I mean, her being granddaughter of death is kind of more of a thing, but so we get some duchessing, which is apparently.
we also get to meet a new watch member in Buggy Swires, who is a pixie.
He describes a gnome in this.
True, but he's
I think the pixie thing comes later.
Yeah, but he's
when the Feagles are more established. But
yeah. I know we did have wee man Arthur deputised in Feet of Clay.
Yes, I think that's a temporary thing, just so that he could rescue Colon.
Yeah, but Buggy Swires, but I don't think we get we get his mount.
I think he's aerial officer later. I think there's something about gnomes have the same amount of belligerence as other people, but it's concentration to a smaller thing, which again another slight addition to the watch.
Yes. Right. Do you think we've gone over everything?
I mean, probably not everything, because I don't think you can with these books, but we've certainly done enough, and it's getting late again.
Otherwise this would be a three-parter, and I don't think we can manage that.
I mean, I think we're going to try not to have too many of these two-parters, but we'll have to see how we go, to be honest.
I mean, there's a lot, certainly in the later ones, that could do with unpicking, but we shall see. Thank you very much for sticking with us
through all this time.
We appreciate it. Next time, it is The Truth. This is the 25th Discworld book.
Do you remember the paperback coming out? And
yeah, so this is 2000. So yes, we have The Truth, which would be fun. So anyway, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
And we'll catch you again next time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Dining Table Discworld. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Dining Table Discworld. You can also find us on BlueSky at dtdiscworld. All our other contact information and credits for our music can be found in our show notes. Thank you for listening again, and we'll see you in our next episode.